Let not your heart be troubled. Listen to me, Sean Hannity. I'll have the latest news and what it all means for you. It's coming up at 2 right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Tweet from Sean from Elmwood Park. Where in the world is Matt Lauer?
Oh, too soon.
Yeah,
he was
good.
fired this morning, in case you're just joining us, after an allegation that he had sexual inappropriate behavior with an employee, but also in that memo from Andrew Lack mentioned that this might not be an isolated incident. That we're also presented with reason to believe this may not have been the only incident.
I'm trying to get out ahead of it. Sean from Elmwood Park also makes the point, it's too bad for Matt Lauer. He isn't a congressman. Then this could be buried in the ethics committee or the Byzantine process to file a complaint and then get a very private settlement from a member of Congress, Conyers style.
And we're also learning this morning reporters from the New York Times have been investigating Lauer for several weeks, so I'm sure that played into it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, all right. Boy, you've heard that the people have spoken. All right, so the Senate GOP inching closer to a tax reform deal. The Senate proposal passing out of the Senate Budget Committee yesterday, so that's one hurdle cleared. And there seems to be a warming to a deal in the offing from the likes of Bob Corker and Ron Johnson. Could it all come down to McCain again? Oh, goodness,
no. Oh, my gosh, no.
Donald Trump commented on the likelihood of its passage yesterday.
We had a unanimous vote on the tax bill, and it goes now the next step, and I think we're going to get it passed. I think it's going to pass, and it's going to be very popular. It's going to have lots of adjustments before it ends. But the end result would be a very, very massive, the largest in the history of our country, tax cut. And lots of good things are going to happen, including the bringing back to our country of, it probably will end up being over $4 trillion money offshore that's stagnant, that companies and they're just not able to bring it back. So I think it's going to be a number over $4 trillion. Corporate will be able to compete now against the world. If you look at China, if you look at so many other countries, you look at many of the countries, China's at 15%. They're lower than us. We're getting it down to a level that is either going to be lower or right in the ballpark so that we can compete much better with our companies, our great, great companies. And that means jobs, and it means lots of other things.
Yeah, and it sort of is an embarrassment, isn't it, that our corporate tax rate is higher than communist China? The state owning the means of production. For more on these topics, we're pleased to be joined by Pete Sepp. He's the president of the National Taxpayers Union. Pete, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
So let's do it this way before we do the handicapping in the Senate. What about either the House or the Senate version is most troubling to you? What would you like to see addressed that that could possibly be addressed in the Senate plan?
I'd like to see a little more effort at simplification. Of course, every time that you do the political favor trading to get the votes that will push the package through, it's usually adding something to the package. And that normally means creating another tax form, creating another exception in the law. That ends up in the administrative portion of the tax burden. And that's not good for the efficiency of our tax system. That being said, I think some of the major issues that still need to be resolved between the House and Senate bills will be, are they going to get rid of the death tax entirely, or are they going to keep it around only with a bigger exemption from the tax? How are they going to provide relief for small businesses? The Senate has a deduction that kicks in depending on what type of business you're in. The House has rate cuts instead. There are two different approaches to the same problem, but they really have to pick one or the other, whichever bill ends up reaching the president's desk. There are other matters to resolve about how international earnings are going to be taxed and how you're going to prevent what's called base erosion. These are all technical issues, but the important point is, as you were saying earlier, we are making substantial progress, clearing a lot of hurdles, and I would share the president's optimism that we have good momentum. Good momentum, though, doesn't mean success. It still means hard work ahead.
Well, Pete, one thing that I'm personally losing sleep over is the ability to write off the mortgage interest and property taxes for my federal income taxes.
Yes, well, I think that is headed in the direction of preserving some kind of deduction. It's important to remember the House's bill capped mortgage interest at the first $500,000 of indebtedness on a home. The Senate doesn't have that cap, basically preserves the mortgage interest deduction. The situation is reversed with the House bill as far as state and local tax deductions. It has a $10,000 property tax deduction you can take. The Senate gets rid of them entirely. I think actually they're going to split the difference in the right way. In fact, preserving the mortgage interest deduction and retaining some kind of property tax deduction. So I think you'll be sleeping a little better at night pretty soon.
Forgetting the hypocrisy of the newly minted deficit hawks on the left who agreed to, a doubling of our national debt over the last 8 years of Obama. There are Republicans who are worried about the deficits that the proposal could elicit. And so one of Corker's ideas was to have an automatic tax increase trigger if the additional economic and corresponding revenue growth that is being predicted doesn't come to pass. I don't like automatic tax increase trigger. Do you?
No, that's not a good idea. And, of course, having that trigger out there, even if it's not actually engaged, really has an impact on business planning and probably individual planning. I mean, it doesn't have to actually take effect in order for people to think, well, goodness, maybe I shouldn't invest more money in that equipment for my plant because if some arbitrary figure for economic growth doesn't come true, suddenly I'm going to be paying a higher business tax rate and all of my balance sheets are torn into shreds. So we need to be very careful about those kinds of mechanisms. I think a better way to do this would simply be to have Congress confront the situation with spending reductions. That would be a way that everybody wins, especially taxpayers.
So if the economy is doing well, the job numbers are great, stock market is at an all-time high, home sales are up, why do we need to give corporations a tax break? Why can't it be a middle-class tax break?
Well, I think markets in part are doing well because they are having the expectation of substantial tax reform. If Congress doesn't come through with that, we may very well see a situation in the next year where financial markets are not performing as well. In addition, by standing still, we will keep falling further behind. President Trump alluded to that in his remarks prior to our discussion about China having a 15% tax rate. Well, we need no longer look further than our own trade partners for rate reduction examples, too. The fact is, all around the world, from United Kingdom to Asian nations, corporate tax rates and other business tax rates are coming down. They are reforming their systems, and we are going to become less and less competitive as time goes on. We are hitting a high watermark here of what our economy can carry along on expectations. We're going to have to make actual policy changes if we want to keep our economy going and growing.
And even critics of the proposal concede that lowering the corporate rate and some of the other components of the plan would engender greater economic growth in the forthcoming years. But it seems like Republicans are still trapped in this equity game, right? And and responding to the tired and fallacious rhetoric of the left, the class envy rhetoric of the left about it's not a middle-income household tax credit, or it's not a middle-income household tax relief, and it's a tax cut for the rich and all this stuff. Point of fact, just some facts here. The top 1% pay 40% of all taxes. They did in 2014. The bottom 95% pay 40% of all taxes. So I'm sorry, where is the inequity exactly? I mean, the whole scheme, the whole graduated income system is redistributionist fundamentally redistributionist. So it seems to me Republicans need to stop kind of apologizing for trying to move this along and engaging the terms of debate as set forth by the left and start talking about growth like you're talking about, Pete, and dispelling the canards about equity that the left is promulgating.
Yeah, absolutely so. And I point out that the 40% of tax burden that richest 1% of America carries is very, very high relative to other countries. I mean, even Scandinavian countries distribute their tax burdens more equitably, so to speak, across their populations through things like value-added taxes and high-income tax rates. In fact, that top 1% accounts for about 20% of all the income, and as you said, 40% of all the taxes, the income taxes, they're pulling twice the load relative to their income. That is highly progressive, and the tax relief that's being delivered through the Senate bill, for example, would result in a $2,200 reduction in a median income family's tax bill per year if the Senate legislation passes intact. That is a simple fact, and actually it's relatively easy enough to calculate if you want to sit down and add up the new standard deduction, the higher child tax credit, all of the new provisions. You can figure out how it affects you, and you'll be pleasantly surprised by the result.
Yeah, so for that median household of $50,000, that's about a 5% salary increase, what you just described. I mean, that's a real thing.
Yeah, that's a real thing. And that doesn't necessarily include the wage growth that a better economy will generate or the job creation. Tax Foundation has estimated 900,000 new jobs created under the Senate plan. More than 30,000 of those would be headed to Illinois.
Boy, that'd be new. Since we've created like net 3 jobs this century. Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union. Pete, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Love you. Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're